Welcome to the next episode of Unanswered Maydays. In this episode, we're going to be asking the question, why mitigate for wildland fire? We're going to be looking at Jack Cohen's research in the home ignition zone and look at how mitigation impacts the burn, bite, kill you framework for firefighter risk and exposure. My name is Mike Jensen, Associate Professor with Washington State University Extension, also a volunteer firefighter, EMT, now pretty much retired, but have been committed to looking at the importance of wildfire mitigation across the country and have worked with dozens of communities around the country and thousands of individuals, community members, nonprofit folks, firefighters, and others, helping them to understand wildfire mitigation. So every firefighter has heard this phrase, risk is part of the job. And that is true. Firefighters accept risk. Volunteer firefighters accept risk. EMTs accept risk. Wildland firefighters accept risk. Every person who responds when somebody else is in trouble understands that service comes with danger. But the burn, bite, kill you framework asks a harder question. Which risks are avoidable and which risks are being created upstream before the fire department ever arrives? Today's episode is about wildfire mitigation, community responsibility, and firefighter exposure. It's about answering a question many homeowners and communities quietly ask. Why should we mitigate? Why should we clean gutters? Why move firewood? Why create defensible space? Why screen vents? Why improve access? Why participate in Firewise? Why spend money before the fire? The answer is not only property protection, the answer is firefighter protection. The U.S. Fire Administration describes fire-adapted communities as places where people work collectively to identify wildfire risk and take action to reduce loss. Also, USFA also connects the work to USFA also connects that work to safety of both residents and firefighters. The USFA also connects that work to safety of both residents and firefighters. That point matters. Mitigation is not just about saving the house. Mitigation is about shaping the fire ground before the firefighters arrive. In the burn, bite, kill you framework, burn is the hazardous environment we create. Bite is how firefighters and residents are exposed. And the kill you is the downstream consequences, the injury, the disease, the trauma, the disability, the loss or death. Mitigation interrupts that pathway. To understand why mitigation matters, we need to talk about Jack Cohen. Cohen is a research physical scientist with the U.S. Forest Service, and he changed how we understand the wildland-urban interface, the WUI. His work helped shift the wildfire conversation away from only asking, how do we stop the wildfire, towards asking, how do homes ignite? That seems like a small shift, but it's not. It's a major shift in responsibility, in prevention, and in firefighter safety. Cohen's research on home ignitability showed that wildfire home losses are strongly influenced by the characteristics of the home and its immediate surroundings, not just by the size or intensity of the wildfire itself. That comes from Cohen's Preventing Disaster. One of his key insights is that during wildfire events, during WUI fire events, the home itself becomes part of the fuel system. In one memorable phrase, Cohen wrote that a house becomes the fuels. And if you think about it, the driest fuel in a forest environment is the home. It's air conditioned and dehumidified during the summer and heated and dehumidified during the winter. And so it's probably the driest fuel you're going to find in the forest. That changes the whole conversation. If the home and its immediate surroundings determine ignition potential, then wildfire mitigation is not simply a forest problem. It's a home problem. It's a parcel problem. It's a neighborhood problem. It's a planning problem. And from the BPK perspective, it's a fire exposure problem. Cohen's work led to the concept of the home ignition zone or structural ignition zone, whichever you prefer, often described as the home and the area immediately surrounding it. In different discussions, this area is described as roughly the home and surrounding 100 to 200 feet, or approximately 40 meters. Depending on the context and publication, Cohen's Wildland Urban Interface Fire Problem, from his Preventing Disaster, the key point is not the exact number of feet. The key point is the zone where the home ignites is often close to the structure. So thinking about roofs, decks, vents, gutters, fences, firewood, mulch, thinking about ornamental vegetation, about propane tanks, vehicles, sheds, combustible debris. Cohen's research emphasized that embers or firebrands are a significant ignition source, especially when homes have vulnerable roofs or nearby combustible materials. That means a home can ignite even when the main wall of flame never approaches it. That is why the home ignition zone matters to the BBK framework. The home ignition zone is also the firefighter exposure zone. Think about that. Think about that when you're trying to decide whether or not to mitigate around your home or not. When the home ignition zone is not addressed upstream, firefighters inherit the consequences downstream. More structures ignite, operations last longer, increasing the exposure. Smoke exposure increases, heat exposure increases, contaminated PPE events increase, entrapment potential increases, fatigue increases. The bite becomes larger because the burn was not reduced. For generations, many communities understood wildfire protection as suppression. If a fire starts, you call 911 and firefighters respond. That's not the case anymore. Cohen has challenged that framing. In his 2008 discussion of the WUI problem, Cohen argued that preventing wildfire disasters requires framing the problem in terms of home ignition potential, not simply wildfire control. I often tell folks that I'm a recovering suppressionist, recovering preventionist, and have been fixated on wildfire mitigation because it has the ability to save firefighters' lives and community members' lives just by doing some simple things around the home. The upstream argument, it says that if we focus only on putting the fire out after it starts, we're too late. Cohen also noted that fire suppression remained the principal approach, even though the home ignition zone approach has been adopted by National Firewise efforts and others. The point's important for local leaders and homeowners. The fire department cannot mitigate every roof, every gutter, every deck, every fence, every woodpile, every driveway, every propane tank, and every attic vent at the moment of dispatch. Those are upstream conditions. Things that are ready in place before the call, before the fire. They must be addressed before the incident. That does not diminish the role of firefighters. It clarifies the role of community. Firefighters can and do suppress fire. Communities can reduce the need for firefighters to operate in extreme, unnecessary, and preventable exposure environments. This is through mitigation. So why mitigate? Because mitigation changes the fire ground. A home with clean gutters, a Class A roof, screened vents, a non-combustible area near the structure, defensible space, visible address numbers, accessible driveways, separated firewood, and reduced ladder fuels creates a very different operational environment than a home surrounded by heavy vegetation, stored fuels, attached wooden fencing, blocked access, and ember traps. The Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety recommends a 0 to 5 foot non-combustible zone around buildings to reduce ignition from embers. Also, radiant heat, direct flame contact. NFPA Firewise USA program teaches people how to adapt to living with wildfire and encourages neighbors to work together and take action. That's from the NFPA, National Fire Protection Agency, Firewise USA. Through BBK, mitigation becomes more than property protection. It becomes exposure reduction. Mitigation reduces the burn. Burn reduces the bite, and reduced bite helps reduce kill. So the outcomes are much better. And those kill you outcomes are not abstract. Firefighters are known to face elevated occupational cancer concerns. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classified occupational exposure as a firefighter as a group 1 carcinogen, meaning that the same risk as being in contact with substances such as benzene. NIOSH created the National Firefighter Cancer Registry for cancer because firefighter work history and exposure history matter. If exposure history matters, then preventing exposure matters. That is why mitigation matters. So if mitigation is so important, then why don't people act? Why do homeowners and communities hesitate from doing wildfire mitigation? So the answer is not simple. So research on homeowner wildfire mitigation shows that people do not make mitigation decisions based only on information that they have. They also respond to the costs, to the aesthetics, to trust, to social norms, to risk perception, to their physical ability and what their neighbors are or aren't doing. And that comes from Brenkert and Smith, Dickinson et al. Some homeowners worry about the cost of tree removal, root replacement, vent upgrades, driveway improvements, or defensible space. Some do not want to change the look of their property. Some moved into the woods because they wanted trees. They wanted the privacy. They wanted the shade and a natural landscape. Some believe it won't happen here. Some also assume that when fire happens, firefighters will save the home. Some feel overwhelmed by the long checklist that they might be provided. Some may not have the capacity because they're elderly, disabled, low income, or physically unable to complete the work. Some distrust government programs. Some wonder why they should do anything if their neighbors aren't doing anything at all. So Dickinson and colleagues found that wildfire mitigation decisions are shaped by risk, of interdependency, and social norms, meaning people are influenced by both neighboring conditions and perceptions of what others are doing. That tells us something that's important, is that mitigation is not only technical, it's social. A single homeowner can reduce risk, but neighborhoods create exposure conditions together. So the burn by kill you framework helps make that visible. My property can affect your property can affect mine, and together our properties affect the firefighters who come to respond. BBK is not about blame. It's about shared responsibility. Jack Cohen's work points upstream. If the home ignition zone largely determines ignition potential, then homeowners, landowners, neighborhoods, fire departments, planners, local government, nonprofits, universities, state agencies, federal partners, and elected officials all have a role. Homeowners reduce ignition pathways. Neighborhoods build social norms. Fire departments provide local operational knowledge. Nonprofits build trust and capacity. Local government shapes road, land use, water systems, codes, public works, and emergency management. Universities and extension translate the research into practical education that homeowners can use around their property or in their community. State agencies provide technical support, policy, funding, and forestry expertise. Federal partners provide research, data, grants, and national guidance. Elected officials set priorities and allocate the resources. Every one of these roles affects the burn. And every change in burn affects the bite. So why mitigate? Because mitigation protects homes. Mitigation protects neighborhoods. Mitigation protects evacuation routes. Mitigation protects firefighters. Because a fire that does not ignite a home does not require a firefighter to defend that home. Because a safer home ignition zone creates a safer exposure environment. Because the wildfire may last a day, but that exposure to the firefighter may last a career. Jack Cohen helped the fire world understand that the WUI problem is not only about controlling wildfires, it's about preventing home ignitions. The BBK framework adds one more layer. Preventing home ignition also prevents firefighter exposures, the burn, bite, kill you. Mitigation interrupts the pathway. This has been Unanswered Maydays. Be safe, stay curious, be kind to one another, and remember that the safest firefighter exposure is the one the community helped prevent before the fire ever started. Please look at the resource list at the end of this podcast and also a checklist and local numbers for more information. And as I like to end, especially my wildfire mitigation programs, I like to say, may the mitigated forest be with you. Thank you.